I mean, I had it, but I
You know,
didn't copy it.
one of my pictures now.
Give everybody a heads up that you're,
Oh,
Right.
great.
Most of it
Okay,
there, and if you
great.
need to
Great.
Folks, we'll go ahead and get started. We're already a little bit behind, so. A couple of things. First of all, I wanted to introduce Emily to everyone. I was going to introduce all of you to, or have Emily introduce you guys, but Emily is going to be our scribe for our meetings. So what a great help, and very thankful for her contribution for these meetings, which allows all of us to obviously be that much more engaged and not have to worry about taking notes. So Emily, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Really
Good way to help.
It's a huge help. I wanted to not through July, and Carol, bless her heart, recognized I had like a massive typo. I just kind of went crazy on April, and just kind of, I don't know.
Oh,
We couldn't get
4
out of this
meetings in
month.
April.
Yeah, well, and they're all in kind of random dates and the whole 9 yards. I mean, it's really pretty dramatic. So the April 10th and April 26th dates, you could cross off because it's just, I'm not really sure. I just kind of spazzed right there. So it really goes the 5th, then the 26th, and then we jump into May 10th, 24th, and then June 14 and 28, and then July 12 and 26. So I apologize for the kind of the screw up on April, but that's what it should look like. Feedback that I got from folks seemed to be that would work as best as we could try to accommodate, as well as the time that we're going to meet, which will be from 5 to 6:30. And I recognize some of you've got some other commitments and may have to duck out early upon occasion, and I get it. So we'll try to charge through as best we can. The other is, Kim, I believe, sent out minutes from the last meeting, so we had an opportunity to review those. Do we need to have a motion to accept those at all?
Probably won't hurt, might not
probably.
Yeah, so,
moved.
thank you. Is there a second? Thank you. Any discussion on the notes at all? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Actually, I had something in the minutes.
Yeah.
It said that I said that we rejected a proposal to sell the property, but rather to maintain it, and it should be retained.
Retain, okay, thank you. I'll follow up with Kim on that then. Okay, and we'll get that corrected. Marcia, thank you. All right, then diving into the agenda, I wanted to just quickly, before we kind of go into some of the discussion about areas, I know we kind of touched on in our first meeting, really the charter, and I didn't want to sit down and kind of read through it word for word, because I think that's a waste of everybody's time. But I wanted to make sure that we were very clear on what the charter is essentially asking us to do. So I'd like to kind of recap where I see that, and if there's any discussion on the points that I'm making, I'm certainly open to it. But the charter asks this committee to develop a proposal to repurpose the MET building and the associated costs that are going to be a part of that. And that it would be, those costs and what the repurposing would be for the district office, for Zenith, and for daytime adult ed. as a part of that, this committee, we want to evaluate the key issues in each area. I feel like with consideration to health and safety for those, and I'll just kind of lump them into those three entities that would be using the building. Accessibility, if that pertains to ADA or otherwise, code or otherwise, and then environment, and that being the area in which the building happens to sit. That's going to be adjacent to the new middle school. It also happens to reside in a neighborhood. So making sure that obviously that makes sense. A second piece of the charter, and again as I see it, is to develop a proposal for use of the basement at NET. And that space actually could include leasing to a private entity. It is this committee's role, again in my viewpoint from what I understand in the charter, that we would develop criteria that would be acceptable for the space to be used based again on proximity to the middle school, the fact that district offices would be housed there, Zenith would be housed there, and daytime adult ed would be housed there. This committee would evaluate potential use proposals. That we also need to take a look at a method as to how we would communicate how this committee would accept proposals. So if we were to review those, how would people know to submit them? And then also to have a timeline for accepting and then the cutoff time for those proposals, so people understand what the expectations are as it relates to timing for those. And then lastly, I see that we would be working with Oak Point and validate with an independent estimation firm on the function and the concept to recommend. The focus clearly is on the function of the building, and we're not involved in the architectural layout, we're not involved in who gets what size office space. It's not, as I see it, the purpose of this committee, but really more of the function of the building. So I want to make sure that's how I view the charter, and I want to make sure that we're aligned on that, and if not, then let's have some conversation to make sure that that makes sense. Yes, ma'am.
I just wonder how close the future layout of the building is to the future cost. I mean, certainly a cost estimator is going to have to know some of that information, what's going to be done inside the building. I thought I just heard you say we wouldn't be involved in layout.
Well, in the sense, so let me clarify, good question.
Sure.
That I think in the larger scope, it seems like that we would, in terms of let me rephrase. I don't see the committee, saying here's how we're gonna parse up the building in terms of office size and who gets what. And I think we need to have an understanding of the needs for those entities, but I don't think we should get stuck into who goes where, what goes where, and how big that should be.
Okay.
I don't see that as our role. Now, if you think I'm wrong.
Well,
I'm
I think that there are significant costs that are gonna be associated with the heating, the electrical, the stairs, those costs are going to be there no matter how the building is laid out and arranged. So there's that piece, and then there is the space needs piece. But in terms of getting this to voters in November, I'm not sure how nitty-gritty we need to get with those plan details. And is that what you're saying?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
Is, I just want us to caution that, we're not here to design a building. We're here to understand what the costs and implications are of repurposing the building for these needs that are stated in the charter, and understand what the costs are going to be so that we can deliver that information to voters so they can make a decision. That was all. I kind of walked away from our first meeting a little bit concerned that we were gonna dive a little deeper in the weeds, and quite frankly, we should. And Marcia, as long as I've known her, has always been really good about being very focused. And it's easy for me to dive into the weeds, it's just how I'm wired. But even some of the discussion that we had in our first meeting, I think Marcia was clear in terms of saying, hey, I'm not really sure that's in the scope of the charter, and I think she's absolutely right about that. So it's easy for us to go down a rabbit hole on something, and I'm just cautioning the committee that we should hear ourselves and each other as it relates to that.
So while we are focusing on function, we're balancing that with the financial.
Clearly.
So clearly, when we propose something to the board, recommend something to a board, it's gonna have a functional aspect and a financial aspect associated with it, so we're trying to.
Absolutely. Allison?
I mean, I guess, I think there's sort of a sliding scale here and a fine line, because there are times when decisions about, I mean, how many walls need to come down is gonna be a major factor in the cost. So for me to feel like I can go to the school board or to voters and say, we really looked very hard at different options for bringing the cost down, I need to at least feel like we've explored, okay, could, if for the first 5 years, could there be temporary walls here? Could there be cubicles put in for this need? Could there, and obviously that's connected to what are the big cost items, and I don't necessarily right off the top of my head know, oh, well, you could save $200,000 by just bringing in some temporary walls, and so I agree that we don't wanna go down a road of nitpicking, but we should also know when we're talking about, okay, we'd like to have a new elevator, or we'd like to have these things, is there, what's the dollar amount associated with that? I just wanna feel like we've talked about identified possible ways of bringing the cost down, and then if we get to the point where we say, well, that wasn't an option, I don't wanna have to go to voters and say, well, we weren't allowed to talk about that. I wanna be able to say, we determined that wasn't realistic, or it was realistic.
Well, and I think Tyler with Oak Point will give us that professional guidance. Where do we start? What is the first layer? And so there are those mechanical, electrical items, and then from there, then you look at room construction. But in the scheme of it all, you have those different pieces, and that's what we need him to do, is to guide us through that process.
And then we'll validate it with an independent firm.
Is our whole purpose to look at the lowest cost that we can come up with? I mean, it sounds like what we're talking about, we keep saying, well, how can we do it the cheapest? How can we do it so it doesn't, and is that our focus? Is that our goal?
If that's your perception of what I spelled out here, then that wouldn't be, that's not my intent.
Okay.
I don't think we should be looking at it in terms of let's go with the lowest cost bidder type mentality. It's what are the needs to repurpose the building for the entities that we're talking about would be in the building, so that it's safe, so it's healthy, so it meets code, so it meets any ADA, the things that should be required of a building that would serve a function so that it can be a productive use purpose. So I don't know that, at least for me, I'm not even thinking about how expensive will it be or how cheap can we make it. I'm not even thinking about any of that. I'm just trying to understand how do we repurpose the building for the purposes of which it's intended based in the charter, and then understand from the experts, because I'm not that guy in terms of, okay, so to do those things, to meet code, to meet AD, to the structural piece, whatever those things ought to be based on their expertise, ultimately what's the dollar sign in front of that? So I'm not looking at it in terms of how expensive or how cheap. What will it take to get there? Does that help answer your
Yeah, it
question, Meg?
does, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments? All right. Thank you. I just want to make sure that, as a committee, we're aligned on that, because if we feel like, someone's like, yeah, I think we should be going in this direction, and we're not, then I'm not sure that we'll be as productive as I think we could be. All right? All right, moving along then, just a quick recap then on the walkthrough. I was there, Wax was there, Carol was there, Meg was there. If you haven't walked the building in the last few years, I would certainly encourage it. The one thing, so I, was trying to be like the real diligent guy and walk up the street and have my little notepad and my little pen in hand. And about 3/4 of the way through the walkthrough, Carol says, "Are you getting all this, Bob?" And I looked at her and I said, "I don't even know where to start."
Yeah. Overwhelming.
It was certainly eye-opening in terms of what's there. So if you haven't had an opportunity to do that in a few years, or even ever, I know Keith would probably try to work it in a schedule to do that when it's appropriate. But it was certainly worth the opportunity to spend, I don't know, the hour and a half or so that we did. So first of all, thanks, Keith, for taking the time to do it, but it was certainly helpful. And again, we kind of stuck to the plan. We didn't examine every crack that was in the floor or every chip of paint that wasn't on the wall. It was really just, where are some of the key bigger areas that we know we need to, the point that I was just making when Carol asked me 3/4 of the way through the walkthrough, I didn't even know where to begin, because it was a little bit overwhelming, at least from my perspective. Taking a look at, how would we, and again, trying not to get into the weeds, which is my propensity, but taking a look at how would you heat the building. Is the issue with the elevator that's been there since, I guess, the 70s, and how we're kind of have to scavenge for parts if we need to fix something. So how would you go about, at some point in time, replacing that or redoing that? Were there issues with stairs as a result? Part of our discussion for this evening will be around the basement. The basement is there's a lot going on down there, and again, and I'm just looking at it purely as a layman. I'm not a structural engineer in any way, shape, or form, but to take a look at how do you utilize the space. One thought that did come to mind after the walkthrough was in terms of just overall health of the building. And I didn't ask the question more there because I didn't think about it beforehand, but in terms of, I was curious as to whether or not there were any mold issues. And as in looking around in the basement, it made me think about it as I was walking home. It's like, I should ask that question. So that's why even I put in here, health became a question in my mind. So, Maria?
Just as a listener, when I'm wondering, were you overwhelmed by its beauty? Because I don't know what, you said you've been overwhelmed, I don't know why. And when you say there's a lot going on in the basement, what does that mean, there's a lot going on in the basement?
Yeah, thanks. It's easy for me to speak in generalities. So the overwhelming part is it looked like the building needed a lot of repair. I mean, it looks like it needs some help. And again, I'm just looking at it from just a layman's point of view. There's a lot going on in the basement. I mean, we went down to where the heating system kind of joins in to this building. And I was thinking, okay, so there would need to be not only an updating, but how do you wind up heating the building based on, because it's tied into the other building at this point in time. It was those kinds of things that, to me, I didn't know how to capture it, because it just seemed like, wow, there's more going on here from a structural standpoint. And again, without diving too deep into it, we had Carmen was with us and trying to ask, questions as it related to the building and as a part of Carol's team, or your husband's
Husband's
company. So from that standpoint, the overwhelming part was it on the surface certainly looked like there was a lot of work that needed to be done to get the building in a place that it could be utilized for the entities that are in the charter that we want to repurpose it for. I think anything can be done, but it just seemed like there was a lot there that needed to be done.
Yeah, maybe Meg could share
Well,
her
just
impressions.
aesthetically, asking that question about the beauty of it, I actually hadn't thought much about, from the outside, how MET looked. And when I went inside and looked at some of the classrooms, I was incredibly impressed with the beauty of an old school. I loved the big rooms, the windows, the light that was coming through. I know there are lots of issues that have to be taken care of, but there was something very nostalgic about being in the building that I didn't remember, because I hadn't been there since Chris and Lisa were in school here, so that was quite a while ago. But I was impressed with that, and so I came away with a stronger feeling of liking the idea of preservation, and I hadn't felt that way so much before, so.
I guess I'm a little discouraged to hear the idea that it's in such rough condition. I mean, I've spent a good amount of time in there over the last couple years, just visiting and going and being part of classroom activities and presenting, and it's, a lot of it is the teachers, of course, but it's a building that is working very, very well for its purpose right now. It's a lovely space to give presentations. There's so much good that is happening there. I've been in a lot of schools around the country, and it's much, much nicer in there than what many of the students all over the country are using right now. So I guess I worry about, wondering what the standards are for what is good enough. And, a lot of us live in houses that have a crack in the foundation or a window that doesn't open here and there. And
Well, I
don't
think,
know.
sorry.
I mean, I've read the entire Oak Point report. It's that, everything that is officially documented, that goes over from a professional what is wrong with that building. It's not, there weren't it says the roof is in fair to good condition. The facade is in fair to good condition. The foundation has a crack or two here and there, and it specifically says that doesn't appear to be a problem, that it happened a long time ago, that it's not. So I didn't see in that Oak Point report huge, massive red flags. And I mean, it's working as a beautiful building and for our kids right now, and I don't know.
Go ahead.
I don't mean to minimize this topic, but it feels like we're going down a rabbit hole.
Yes.
Because to me, with our goal of focusing on function, and in my words, balancing it with financial, the condition of the building is a given. It's where we are. Elevators, foundations, basements, attics, windows. And that's going to be, as we develop a functional use for the building and proposal for the board to consider, that's going to come with a financial aspect. And that's going to be a function of the condition of the building. Good or bad, we can argue about whether it's good or usable now, but I think we've had that discussion over and over again, and now we're really trying to move forward and beyond that and focus on what's the best use for this building, and balancing that with the affordability of doing that, and coming out with a recommendation for the board to consider.
Yeah, I just felt like we went through the negative reflection, and I felt like something else needed to be said as well.
I think that's, listen, Allison, I think that's a fair and balanced approach. That was just my initial perception. You know, didn't dive into it, and I don't know that we have to spend an enormous amount of time deeping.
Yep, I appreciate that. I would just encourage those of you that didn't get a chance to come on the walkthrough to actually look at the mechanicals and the mechanicals, the electrical, the ADA compliances, all those big ticket items to really spend that time with Keith, and just do that.
I've been on so many
I'm-
tours of
I'm
that
not-
building,
I'm
Carol.
not-
I
I'm not, I'm just
I mean, it's
encouraging
different perspectives.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
just encouraging them.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It'll definitely
It's a
be-
very good
everybody will have different
opportunity.
viewpoints. All right, if there's nothing else on the walkthrough, seeing none, and we're gonna move on to, looking at the overview for area days. And again, this is really to kind of provide the committee with, you know, just kind of perspective, background. It's not, again, intended to dive too deep into the weeds, but again, just to try to give the group some perspective. So, if I went down the list, we would start with you, Helen, on Zenith, if that's, if you're
That
ready
works
to.
for me.
rock and roll.
Okay, after the last meeting, I left feeling like you guys just wanted some information about who we are and what we do. Okay, so I can talk till I'm blue in the face about this, but you don't wanna listen to me. You wanna see kids, okay? And so what I have here is really just some basic facts about Zenith, what we do and who we are, okay? And so, after you asked for a presentation, I went to school and I said to the kids, I said, guys, I gotta do this presentation. How should we do it? Okay, and what they came up with was they wanted to do a short video, okay? And I think this video is really interesting because it takes you on a tour of Zenith, but you also get to hear the kids and see what we do, okay? So now I came early to make sure the technology worked. I might need your help,
Can I
Matt.
just like turn the camera a little so that one,
This one's yours?
or you can do the other one too, I don't.
So this was produced by students, written by students. Staff really had, I hate to say it, nothing to do with this. All right, we approved the final product, but I think, and then after that, I'll take questions. This was the part I was the most nervous about, the technology.
It was funny. I myself don't have my own.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Do you guys want one too?
I'll just look at it.
Here, I'll give you.
She's got lots.
Probably knows a thing or two already.
Here, I've got one more for you.
Well, that's enough.
Okay. So while we're waiting for Matt to do this, I'll just go over this sheet so people know. We're the alternative program for grades 10 and 12. Many schools in the state and in the country have alternative programs. All right, our student body is composed of diverse learners, and many of them have had difficulty learning and attending in a traditional educational setting. When I've looked at data, okay, what we see with the alternative learner might be an imbalanced learner. You might have somebody who's really, really strong in math and science and might have some weaknesses in the humanities. The other piece is family systems and struggles within family systems. And our alternative program is a dropout prevention program. So we're looking for kids who are at risk for graduating. We have 24 kids and they're in grades 10 through 12. Everybody who is at Zenith is there by choice, and that is really important. Graham doesn't call me and say, Helen, this kid's coming to Zenith. No. We go through an intake process, we have an application process, and then we have kind of checkpoints. to make sure our students are in good academic standing. They all earn a Camden Hills Regional High School diploma. The diploma is no different than that. They meet the same credit requirements for graduation. However, we deliver our curriculum in a different way, okay? In the traditional high school, you may carry 5 academic classes over the course of a year. At Zenith, we go one by one. So we have 8-week, kind of intensive units. So for 8 weeks, a student would go into a classroom of a credit that they need to graduate. And for that 8 weeks, they will work with that teacher on the curriculum, and at the end of the 8 weeks, if they've done what they've needed to do, they earn a credit and they move on. So for a lot of our students, that is really important for them. They have the option of a half-day or a full-day schedule. Our students go back to the high school to take advantage of electives and such. Some of our kids go down to Mid-Coast. So we've got about half our kids stay all day. And the staff that we have 2.5 full-time teachers, and I'm the half-time teacher and I'm the half-time coordinator. We have a retired teacher from the high school who is kind of a support person, Perry Goodspeed. He's worked with us as long as I've been there. And we also have a social worker 1 day a week who comes in and meets with our kids. So that's my snapshot. So now this is kind of a picture. Classrooms in the kitchen.
I'm Nicole and I'm a sophomore here at Zenith. One way that Zenith has helped me throughout the year is definitely my education. I wasn't a very passing kid in freshman year, and now that I'm a sophomore and I go to Zenith, my grades have been higher and I'm able to focus in class more than I had last year. Another way is my mental health, especially. My mental health used to drag me down when it came to education, but I'm open to a lot of coping mechanisms here where I can confide in people and be able to check in and talk about my issues, where at the high school I wasn't really able to do that. Another way Zenith has helped me is I've made a lot of more relationships with my friends and a lot more healthy relationships with my friends than I did last year, and it's helped me a lot with my mental health, again, because I can focus and pay attention and be happy at Zenith than anywhere else.
I'm a senior at Zenith. So here at Zenith, many kids struggle with hands-on work and sitting in your normal classroom and stuff. So here at Zenith, we've been making mousetrap cars for physics and working with friction and the wheel to axle ratio and all that stuff. And the hands-on environment helps kids instead of just your standard sitting in your classroom, pen and paper. And for like gym, we also go on hikes and stuff like that. It's just all hands-on. I love it.
Hi, I'm Killian and I'm a junior at Zenith. Zenith has helped me academically because it showed me that alternative learning doesn't mean you're different than other people. It's more of a family here than a school. It's not desks in a chair, it's everyone sitting together, sometimes getting off topic and sharing stories and feelings and finding out who you are and who you're going to be. From my 2 years being here, I've not only become a stronger reader and writer, but I've also grown a lot socially. The staff here have really supported me with not only school, but also life decisions. Each teacher shares different relationships with every student here. Being at Zenith has really prepared me for the future I have waiting ahead.
Can I give you a little push?
in central office where they're doing their mousetrap cars. So, I guess I'd take any questions you would have.
My question is for you or Maria. How long has the Zenith program existed? I can't
Shortly
remember.
after we opened the high school.
Mhm.
It was a long time.
No, it was before the high school.
The
Not
new
to-
high
Because
school?
they were in trailers at the old high school with Bill Gifford. Sorry, I don't mean to
Yeah.
correct you, but there was an alternative program at the old high school with Bill Gifford.
If,
Yeah.
if they're, doing some classes at the high school, why aren't they in the high school? I mean, why was that not a part of the new high school?
For some, why aren't we in the high school? I can't answer that.
No, I mean,
Why don't
I'm
we
curious
have to say
when
the
the new
town-
high school was
They did not want to
built.
be at the high school. They felt that was an environment in which they had not succeeded. And it really depends a lot on the population, the
Mhm.
specific kids. And they actually, early on, initiated a fundraising effort
Yes.
to get their own space, but it was not a place of success for them. They wanted a separate place.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
A lot of these kids have anxieties in the classroom environment, don't they?
Very much so. Very much so. The large group setting,
How does it work when they do some electives in the high school, when you're on an 8-week cycle here, and the high school's not, I assume the electives aren't on an 8-week cycle, how do they get through an elective? Do they take it over a longer period of time?
yes, when they come up here, when they go up to the high school, they would work with the high school schedule.
And the core courses are done,
And the core courses, all of their core courses are done at Zenith. They would go up to the high school for art electives, stuff that they were passionate or interested in.
or is it?
And so they participate in the full course at the high school?
Yes,
Right, this sounds like.
Yep.
I'm just, and I'm trying to, in my head, I'm trying to get some space needs. So when you have an 8-week block, is it, in recognizing that all the kids are different levels in a core course, is there a math block? And they all
Yes.
So you've got a teacher teaching different levels?
yes. I create a schedule very similar to the high school, except I have 3 blocks. Okay, and depending on what kids need for graduation requirements, that's how we plan what classes we're gonna teach. So the classes we teach could change from year to year based on the needs of the students. But I have a teacher who's a math and science teacher, and so does that
But you're not
answer
trying
your
to, you're not trying
question?
to run 3 different core courses at the same time?
Yes, we
Oh,
are,
you are.
yes.
So
For
you-
ex-
so your space needs are more than just one room?
Oh,
one
yes.
subject, okay.
Right now, the 3 classes that are being taught there is an English class, there's a world history class, and there's the physics and chem class. So at this point, we have 3 classrooms.
And is that what you feel you would need going forward, or
No.
more?
We would need
Yeah, I have some of that
more.
information.
Yeah.
So
On
what is,
my part.
what is the demand? Does it stay around 24 students, and is that based on space, or are there more students who would want to be part of the program, or?
24 is a pretty consistent number. In the 6 years that I've been there, we've gone as high as 27. Okay, but 24 is a consistent number.
Did you turn kids away, or is that just,
We would have a waiting list.
do you generally have a waiting list?
Yes, we do.
Really? So at this point, there are more kids that would want to be involved than are able to be accommodated
Yes.
now?
But I assume that that's not just a space reason behind like the upper limit and there being a waiting list.
Right.
So,
What determines that?
so if our questioning is around the lines of like, would we like to increase that number and does that need more space? It's not just the space that is a, is
Right.
a factor in that.
There are
What do
2
you need?
issues. It's space and staffing. In order to increase the numbers at Zenith, right now Zenith needs more space with 24 kids. But to expand the program, Zenith would need more space and they would need more staffing.
And has that was what I was referring to, has there been any discussion about
There
that?
isn't space, so it's a moot point.
So I guess, so if there was
We
more
have
space.
talked about it
Yep,
in the earlier vote.
Yep.
When the plan was to go to MET in 2015, part of that was with an understanding to be able to expand Zenith. In fact, in all of the things that we looked at through the CSD board over the past year, like 2 years ago, we did a pretty thorough analysis. I had that information in here. When we looked at the Seton School and the Peterson Building, we looked at all kinds of buildings. All of that was with the intention that Zenith would be able to expand if we had the space to do so, because the need was there. We would need to plan how to expand it, but we knew we would be able to expand it.
Has expansion included middle school grades?
Not that we were talking about at the CSD.
Right, I know, I'm just asking in terms of, I just know because RC 13 has a successful middle school alternative ed program. And so expansion could be, you know, within the grades that we have, but also
I know,
to the middle school.
unfortunately, our two-district system confuses these
Right.
issues, and it's a different district, that would be the middle school.
Yeah.
The middle school had an alternative program within the school several years ago that didn't work that well. There is a potential, it would be a huge undertaking for the SAD district, but there would be a potential to do an alternative type program potentially at the middle school. We would have to really evaluate whether or not the need was there. The middle school's moving to such project-based learning that a lot of what's happening is hands-on in the classrooms anyways. And we have, you know, a behavior program that's a separate program within the middle school. We have 2 self-contained programs already in the middle school. So we would really have to evaluate whether or not we felt an alternative middle school program like Zenith was needed or not right now. But that is a question that the SAD board hasn't even begun to consider, nor has it been something that the administration has brought forward as a high priority need for the middle school.
So to put that a little bit, so you said as the middle schools embrace project-based learning, and I think the goal is for the high school to eventually embrace that style of learning, is there a thought that a long time down the road, the alternative ed program might actually fit better in a project-based high school?
Like we would
Like
need
space-wise?
Just in terms of the style of learning. The project-based seems to be more the style of alternative ed.
I don't think it's just the style of learning. I think it's the student and their social emotional needs as well. And I think that those two are very, very tightly intertwined. And so, yes, if it was a project-based high school and that was primarily our focus, but our focus is really getting kids to know who they are. And I don't know if that could be replicated.
And honestly, there are many students in the alternative program at the high school who were very successful in our middle school traditional program. You know, so not to say that there aren't some middle schoolers who might benefit from an alternative ed, but I think the need for alternative ed increases as kids enter the age of really figuring out who they are.
You mean one size doesn't fit all?
Nope.
No, and I think many of our kids, this is just something anecdotally that I've really learned over the years. Many of our kids have suffered an unresolved loss. Okay, and that unresolved loss is part of the reason they're at Zenith, combined with their kind of alternative learning needs. But I can't stress that social emotional piece strong enough with this group of kids.
Allison?
Do you find at all that there's an issue with homelessness or unsupportive environments or?
I think that's a rabbit hole we don't want to go down right now.
You don't want them to live there?
No,
Yeah.
it's just huge, and I just don't, you know,
We
I
shouldn't
could
be
talk
talking
about that
here.
forever.
That's not the
And
place.
I don't, you know what I mean. So if you want to have
Oh,
a
yeah.
conversation about that, I'd love to.
Some other time.
Okay.
So Helen, thank you for, again, I'd like to move things along just for the clock continues to tick. So I want to be careful that we don't get too stuck on anything else.
So can we maybe establish a way, is it appropriate for me, like, if I don't have like a million questions about Zenith, should I I can get in touch with Helen and just learn more and,
Yeah, absolutely.
Something
I
pops
think,
up that-
again, the purpose here was really just kind of get an overview, and if you want to dig deeper, I think, you're certainly, I don't think Helen would mind you reaching out to her, just so we can kind of.
oh yeah, I'm not objecting to that, I'm just trying to establish
Yeah,
what's the
I think that's-
proper way to.
Yeah,
I would welcome anyone to come for a visit.
great, well, thank you for
Okay.
that, Helen, that's awesome.
So now I've got Heidi's stuff, and what I asked her to do was kind of similar to what I did, just put together a fact sheet. The Adult Learning Center is across the hall from us, at Zenith, okay?
Skipped over. There we go.
And Heidi's role is a little different than the adult ed at the high school. And she serves, really, she does the GED stuff, which is now known as the HISET. And she also works with these different federal programs. The college transitions, the adult transitions, these are all getting people without education a secondary opportunity. And she also works with some as ESL, English as a Second Language. Heidi teaches all 5 sections of the HISET, reading, science, social studies, math, and writing, at the Learning Center location. She teaches and tutors math for college transitions through both UROC and the Learning Center. She works with adult transition students who come in the Learning Center for resume writing, career exploration, and technology. She works one-on-one with ESL. She has volunteers that go in there. In this, she talks about just liking to have a separate room for testing. Okay, and 50 people are served there annually. Her hours are Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4, and she's open the equivalent of 1 day a week during the summer. So, and she has just one big room. Okay,
So when you say she would be liking to have a separate room for testing, does that mean she likes having one, or she would like to have
she
one?
would like to have one.
Yeah, this covers that on the back.
So I could take questions, but I'm not really an expert in this. Go
I
ahead.
need to dominate this, and this is for Maria too. And this kind of pertains to the long-term need for space for adult ed, and especially this type of adult ed. With what appears to be the Department of Labor taking over more of the adult ed functions and the HISET training, do we see adult ed continuing like this and the needs like this for the long term?
It seems to me that this particular program, the daytime program, is really different than the majority of what people think of as adult ed. So we run an adult ed program that has hundreds of courses every year.
And I'm not talking about the arrangement part, I'm talking about this.
So I think it's more likely that part's gonna change than this part.
So this part is, again, just because that was confusing me, this, although it says adult ed, it's really upper,
It's
it's,
the daytime adult ed.
right,
So the evening adult ed is what people typically think of with
Yeah.
adult ed, all the
Yeah.
courses in
Yeah.
finance and
right,
becoming a real estate broker or whatever you wanna
Right.
do.
Right.
This is for the population who is trying to get credentials to move on, become literate, go to college, get their high school
it could
diploma.
be high school age, or could be a couple years post-high school
They're,
age, or,
most of them are slightly older than high school age, but
Okay.
it could be high school age.
thanks.
Is this funded from the CSD budget? Sorry, Marcia.
Adult ed. I just have a question about access.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a program that needs to be available for people basically to walk in off the street to see what's available? Or do people make appointments?
I think it's a little of both.
So I have that question because in terms of the accessibility to the building, which has been on everyone's mind due to safety. So this program needs a freer access than you might want for Zenith or other
Yeah, I mean,
functions in the
I
building.
personally feel that this program has more flexibility than Zenith or the central office. And it might be a better idea to ultimately keep adult ed in the bus barn because of accessibility issues. And there are very limited space needs relative to Zenith in the central office. So I think that, you know, adult ed, I think we have more flexibility to figure out what is the best place for adult ed. Is there ample space at MET? Is there not? Are there accessibility issues that would,
I mean, for the adult learning center, when you say adult ed.
adult learning, the daytime adult ed, whatever we call this particular room that happens in the bus barn. Yeah, just that, it's a tiny slice of the adult ed program.
How much space does it have right now?
One classroom, the equivalent of a classroom.
Like 1,000 square feet or smaller?
No.
Smaller.
No, smaller. 600.
All right, any other questions? All right, moving on, thank you, Helen, again for the insight. District office,
Can I ask a question, a Maria question, or maybe I'll, is that
Grab
with
one and pass it
adult,
on.
this program could potentially stay in the bus barn and still meet the future goals for the bus barn?
Yes, and I'll explain that as we go
Okay.
through this. So I give a little history on this, and, you know, I had this so that you could refer back to it if you wanted to. The bus barn, in RFP, the five-town CSD, I'm gonna back up even further. The differentiation in the two districts can make this confusing for the average person. The SAD 28 district owns the bus barn. Most of the space in the bus barn is used for the five-town CSD functions. Zenith is a five-town CSD function. The central office technically is a five-town CSD central office that the SAD buys services from. Adult ed is five-town CSD function. Transportation is an SAD 28 function. So transportation is the only thing in the bus barn that is the same district that owns the bus barn. Okay? And then the central office is a five-town CSD thing that the SAD buys half the services from. Zenith is completely the high school and adult ed is completely the high school district. So back in 2005, the district sent out an RFP to relocate the central office out of the bus barn. And the other functions, Zenith, because when those functions went into the bus barn, whoever made that decision, I've cursed them many times. I don't know who it was though. The bus barn was never intended to be used for the purposes for which we are using it. It was temporary space for Zenith for the central office. So shortly after they went in there, an RFP went out to get them out of there. But that RFP just didn't go anyplace. Nothing was ever acted upon way back. Then, over the last 12 to 14 years, the topic has surfaced. So that decision was made, well, people didn't seem to care that much about it. It will save us $3.5 million. Let's take that part off of the table of our project, and let's go back to the community, the SAD board is saying this, and figure out what the community will support. A renovated building, doing nothing, or building new, but we're not going to include the MET as part of the conversation. That led to the last vote. Oh, and in the meantime, the CSD board said, okay, SAD board, if you're going to disregard our bus barn needs, that's fine, we understand what you're doing, but we still want to relocate those functions out of the bus barn because it's still an issue. Just because it got voted down doesn't mean we don't have an issue to solve. So the CSD board put together an ad hoc committee that spent about 10 months intensively looking at alternatives around the community. That included conversations with the leadership at the Y about buying the teen center, We had conversations about buying or leasing the Seton School, buying or leasing the Peterson Medical Building. We looked at office space all over the place. We looked at building new at the high school. We had a series of options with associated costs of what we could do. And that was presented to the CSD board, and the CSD board eventually decided, in looking at the top 3 options, that the best option, because it would be in the best financial interest of the CSD district over the long term, was to build new at the high school on property that is behind the student parking lot, so on the campus but not really close to the current high school, to build a new building there for Zenith Adult Ed in the central office. When the high school debt retires around 2022, would be a good time to go back to the community for the CSD. When that debt retired, maybe we could get another building passed. So the CSD said, okay, we'll just sit on this and wait, but that's right now our plan. Then, when all of the initiative from the community to preserve the MET building came back on the table, and it eventually led to the place this spring, or this winter, when the board said, we are willing to we want to put something back on the referendum to try to preserve the building for district uses. The CSD board said, like, oh, that option is now back on the table, even though we planned on doing this thing in the future. This option's back on the table, and the CSD board considered whether or not, like, yes, if that is an option, yes, we would like to go in there like we originally planned. And the board said, yes, we would, for all of those functions. If indeed there remains, yes, we're interested in pursuing that option instead of building it at some future time at the high school. So that's kind of the history of the efforts since 2005 to try to relocate the functions that are in the bus barn that aren't transportation. The central office currently has about 3,600 square feet, and what would be appropriate for the central office is about 6,000 square feet. And this kind of goes through, it's not a surprise to anybody that the bus barn wasn't designed to be office space. It has cement floors, thin walls, poor ventilation. There's nothing redeeming about the bus barn.
There's drains in the
I was gonna
floor.
say, I'm trying to think.
But it's so beautiful.
That's nice windows.
Somebody told me today that the gutters with the wind, like somebody's like, your gutters are gonna blow off that building. The gutters break, yeah, I mean, it's bad. Can't open the windows, there's no air circulation. Anyway, it's not great office space at all, and Zenith doesn't have enough space either. So we're all crammed in, and transportation doesn't have enough space. Transportation needs 3 bus bays, and they have 1 to repair the buses. So we currently have to send stuff out to O'Connor in Augusta a lot because we don't have the space to work on the buses, and we can't keep them outside and do outdoor work for all of the issues that they have. So the transportation department is significantly limited in what it can do because it needs more bus bays. So the SAD 28 district needs its building for bus bays and would love to the 5-town CSD functions to go someplace else so that it could be 2 more bus bays could be built. If 2 more bus bays were built, there would be just over 3,000 square feet left over in the bus barn. And I think there are a lot of potential uses for the leftover space in the bus barn. To name a few, 1, maybe adult ed would work better in the bus barn. I don't know. I think that's worth considering. So potentially that could be in some renovated space in the bus barn. Another one, the Y has been looking to relocate the teen center. They would like to not own the building that they own and potentially put rent space rather than own so they don't have to maintain as much. That potentially could be a great space for the teen center, the remaining bus barn space. I've heard the town of Camden talk about needing archival storage. the district doesn't have enough storage space. It could simply be storage for the district. It could be storage for the district and maybe for the town. It could be a teen center. There could be all kinds of things that it potentially could be, but I mean, I can name like a bunch of needs that it could serve pretty well, pretty quickly. So that's kind of the situation with all those things, and we've estimated that if and again, for me, adult ed, they need really not a lot of space, so wherever they went, I'm sure we could make it work, but between the central office, Zenith, and let's say adult ed, I'm estimating we need about 2 floors of the building. Because Zenith needs probably somewhere between 5,500 and 6,000 square feet, and the central office needs about 6,000 square feet. And I think that's about 2 floors of the building.
Can I ask a question? I'm curious how you came up with the square footage need numbers, what that
We-
process was.
In the process of the ad hoc committee that the CSD board formed, we had contracted with an architect, a local architect, 3A Architects, and had done all kinds of studies with them and our space needs. One of the options we explored was completely renovating the bus barn. We also talked about putting a second story on the bus barn. So that was an option we had explored. And so they did kind of a space needs analysis for Zenith and for us. And we had layouts, literally, we had plans of the Seton School, Teen Center, the bus barn, of what we could do. And that is about the space need that we had, was about 6,000 square feet for all the functions that are happening in that space.
Is that something that we could get a copy of, or a portion of it, just the overall? I don't think anybody wants to see plans for the Seton School, or if it's all together, that would be fine too, but just an explanation of.
I mean, I don't think there's an explanation, but I am pretty sure I can pull up plans that we could have at the central office, plans of the bus barn space that had been developed, potential plans for the teen center. So we had a layout of all of the space of what it potentially could look like. We have those plans.
There's nothing that says, okay, putting a second story on the bus barn doesn't sound like a good idea because X, Y, or Z. There's no narrative written.
Probably embedded in the minutes as it was presented.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
to the
things were
board.
presented to the board, and we have spreadsheets of all of the options that we evaluated. I don't know the value, because we're not evaluating all of those options anymore, so I'm not sure the value in looking at all of the things that we had evaluated, if this committee is really evaluating the option of putting it, you're not even evaluating the option of putting it in. The board's decided that they would like to put those spaces in there, so it's really a matter of, how that can be done in a cost-effective way, but you can certainly come and look at the
I don't really wanna sift through it
plans.
either. It's more just, I think it gives the community more confidence in the level of thinking that has gone into the decisions because people throw out these things, well, why aren't they just doing this? And then it's nice sometimes to be able to throw at them, well, they did look at that, and they did look at that, and they did look at that, and
Yeah, you had some summary sheets.
it's
as
not
the board is
urgent in any
narrowing
way.
down the choices.
Yep.
Of what each option was, what it was potentially going to cost. So maybe just one of those.
Yeah, I can look, see what we had presented to the board, because we presented a bunch of stuff to them.
Even just listening to you say that you actually did look at putting a second story in the bus barn, like that's something I've heard thrown out as like a crazy idea, but also, if the school really knew what they were doing, they would have looked at this. And it seems like oftentimes there is a response to that. You did look at
It's
this
so
or that,
unfortunate
imagine
that the community assumes the worst instead of assuming the best.
It's, you know what, I think it's just human nature, they do it with a select board too, it's, stupid select board that didn't think of this, and sometimes it's not the case, but be nice to have a response.
It's good to know that there was an exercise that justifies the square footages, so that's a good
Yep.
place for us looking at MET. And I think that's what
Yep.
we need
Right.
for information is, okay, so the central office needs 6,000 square feet, the Zenith program needs 5,500 square feet. I'm hoping to hear from Oak Point, what are the square footages on each floor of the building? Maybe you know that already. And that'll help us in our next steps, whatever those happen to be.
Yep.
So thanks.
Within that, Maria, so like with the 5,500 or the 6,000 square feet, obviously the way they're currently is, the building is configured in a certain way. And I know it's not our remit to look into all those details of that, but the 55 or the 6, or central office, is it pretty clear how that would need to be configured? I'm assuming thought's been put in as to how that would best look in terms of like whether there would need to be extra walls built in there. Has any of that thought been done where it's at a place of like, we've done all the research and this is how it needs to be, and that would be easy for us to see?
I don't necessarily know that. The answer to that question is, I can't remember the level of detail of layout that Oak Point originally did, because we have to remember kind of the process that you guys are in and the process that we were in 2015 when the vote got voted down. And so you think about the information we had up to the vote will be the same information this group has up to the vote, which is not the same information we have right now about the middle school building, because the vote passed and the architects have been working like banshees to do exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
And they've been working with the staff to do the exact layouts and figure all that stuff out. Typically that happens after something's approved, or else you'd be spending $1 million on architect fees before you even knew if something was gonna fly. So it's a conceptual thing that's done at the outset, and I don't know if Oak Point ever did that level of detail of exactly where rooms would go and what walls would have to go in and out. So I don't think that that's been done.
And that's okay, like,
Yeah.
my reason for asking isn't to seek for our committee to like be looking for all those details or any get involved in that. It's just if it was done, so that we should, I guess, just make sure that we know what level it's been done to, because we've had some very basic conversations in the 2 meetings so far about these number of walls that you build add this amount of cost on, and we're trying to, I think, factor in as part of our mission of what's the most cost-effective way we could renovate MET and repurpose it for the purpose that we need. And if that purpose and design was already really clear, then that would sort of take some of the thinking away from it. But,
Yeah, but
I hear
that-
what you're saying, Maria, because I know the amount of work that's going on for the new middle school building, so.
Yeah, which happens after.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not looking
Yeah.
to get us into that place, just was curious if that had been.
But back to Carol's point that she made a while ago, that's Oak Point. Oak Point can tell us, like, so here's a typical office space. But if you're trying to save costs, these are options that you have. So, I mean, they can walk us through those kinds of things.
I'm not worried about
The
that.
conceptual budget is a pretty strong budget. I mean, it really has some meat behind it, because you usually go to referendum on the conceptual budget. So whether the walls, they might seem like a lot of money for us, but in the scheme of things, the heating system, the
Yep.
ventilation system, that's where the real money is gonna happen.
The
And then,
electrical system,
electrical, plumbing, if there's plumbing needed.
sprinkler.
So I think the walls, those are the big ones.
Keep going, yeah,
But those are given no matter what use
absolutely.
we recommend. But it sounds like 2 floors are really what the CSD, SAD need.
So that's more like 16,000 square feet.
It's not all usable, I would think.
Yeah,
Yeah, the gross square footage of
we need 12.
MET is a little over 8,000 square feet per floor,
Right.
but that's,
That's gross.
outside,
That's,
outside, so you gotta take,
Corridor.
stairways out of there,
Yeah.
corridors,
And
and,
if we have to relocate the elevator,
relocating elevators.
that takes some of the space
Yeah.
on those floors, so
Handicap ramp. if
I mean,
you
my
need to
best
work
guess
your
is
way
that
inside.
each of those functions would take the vast majority of a floor.
and it sounds like the adult ed, while not a lot of space, is more a matter of the access, the type of access to the building that you mentioned.
Right.
It's a different type of access.
Yeah. And that's why Maria's suggesting maybe it could stay.
That's
Yeah.
Or what about the basement
Maybe.
as an alternative for the adult?
And I think that's some of
That's
what
what we
this
have to look at.
committee should look at.
The idea is,
Yeah.
storage space.
So I think, you know, maybe as we look at proposed agenda items for future meetings, you know, I think it's, you know, for a big part of what the committee needs to do is the information that we want from a point is gonna be on those key, you know, those big items, elevators and things of that nature, to understand that, because as I mentioned at the outset, I do think we need to be careful about, you know, it's not our role, and I'm not insinuating that it is, but, or that anybody's thinking that way, that it's our role to design an office space. So, but I think what we take a look at for proposed agenda items in the future is then to start getting information from Oak Point to help us understand the bigger pieces, to understand what those costs look like.
Are they, is Oak Point planning on attending these meetings, or are we presenting to them questions that we have, and then they get back to us with answers?
I think, you know, we'll probably request that Tyler be here as often as he possibly can.
Because I mean,
answer
right
those
now, we could
questions.
have asked some questions
Sure.
of them.
So we'll just have to, you know, Emily, we'll just have to capture some of that, those questions as best we can and present them to Tyler. And then he can come back. You know, we'll provide him the minutes of the meeting and say, hey, can you help us out with this information?
How much does it cost every time he comes down? Like, is there, I think there's value in having them here, but also in using time wisely, and sometimes if you can just get a bullet point list of the things that we wanna know, it's better than him having to drive that whole time and.
Fortunately, they're not like attorneys, and they
Okay.
don't charge an hourly.
By the hour.
They don't charge hourly. Because
Okay.
I could answer that question specifically if it was a Drummond Wilson lawyer coming here.
That's right. Well, we don't
But
want
they
that.
have done, you know, a lot of their work I mean, they're not charging us for a lot of the times when they're coming here. In fact, I think most of the time that they've come here, they're not charging us for. You know, I think you guys might have had, or at least I shared it with Bob, I can't remember it, but they came up, you know, the board approved the basic budget that they had, and I'm sure they had some travel in there, but they'll kind of charge us a flat fee, and unfortunately for them, we've been a district that's required a lot more of them than other districts have, and we've gotten our money out of them. And, you know, and twice a month may be too much for them to come up here. But they have been very willing to go well above and beyond what would normally be expected without charging us additional money.
So we're paying that $30,000 no matter what.
Yes, that's all we're paying as well.
I wonder if he could, you know, join us electronically on occasion.
I'm sure he could. I know today he's sick, so that's probably why he's not here.
Well, I think he told us there was a crunch to get the bid documents out.
Yep.
And he'd be more available once they went out, and
Yep.
they have not yet gone out, have they?
Nope.
Yep.
So he's in crunch time and he's sick. So
Which is probably why he's sick.
Dallas is what?
Keith?
If I can just add that, the next part of the process with Oak Point, and I think we talked about this last time, was basically for Tyler and Maria and I to sit down and confirm all the programming needs, so, you know, so we're not saying Zenith needs 6,000 square feet, it's 6,372 square feet. You know, if we do this, and this, and the same thing, so, and then he has square footage to try to manipulate inside that 8,000 square feet per floor, which is what their height.
And then to also talk about what sort of infrastructure is needed to support that standalone building.
All right.
Are we gonna get the stuff from them that I think we were maybe gonna have it today? Just any documents, anything that they've already done?
Well, I'm not sure if those documents, I don't think there are a lot of documents, because they didn't do an in-depth analysis, because they were just giving a a number.
Right.
And then if it passed, then they would give that. So,
But I
so
still
he
think you said there were some things
I
that
know, but
maybe-
let me finish, and he said that he would bring a site plan, which is something that we had asked for, because that was helpful for understanding the stair tower.
Mhm.
And then the other documents that he had, remember he had that binder, that was on the middle matters, that was that report. So
Yeah,
that's what I
so-
remember,
I mean, I just
don't remember
we
if there
talked
was
about
any
there was some
other.
things.
I think
You
there
asked
were
when
some
he
other
could get
things
it.
that he was gonna, that he was gonna put together, and certainly my takeaway was it wasn't something that he was gonna have available for this next meeting. I was under the impression that it was gonna take him a little bit more time to pull that together.
I guess I thought then we said, oh, no, you don't need to create anything new, just anything that you already have, and then you use the words any and all. I don't know if you wanna say any and all, but maybe any and all.
So
I
we
mean,
can
it's just a
follow up.
question.
I mean, there's a little bit covered in the minutes. Talked about needs analysis that he was gonna bring to us.
I don't know if
I mean, yeah, there was some stuff that was talked about.
Yeah, I think he talked
But I mean, I
about
guess I
teacher
was a little bit
interviews.
alarmed at how little, because I thought part of the reason why Oak Point was gonna be doing this was because they already had so much knowledge of the building. And when it came down to it and trying to understand of where that $3.5 million estimate came from, it was more, to me, it just sounded like he was saying there was a generic formula that really didn't look uniquely at MET and what would have to happen here. It was more the standard gut and remodel square footage formula that would be used.
I think what was factored into that, they do have a lot of knowledge about the structural needs and those kinds of things. The infrastructure, starting with somebody new, would have to pay somebody hundreds of thousands of dollars to understand the building as well as Oak Point understands the building. That's why we're using Oak Point right now, because it would just be costly to start from scratch with somebody else. But I think a lot of that is a square foot cost based on a level of understanding of the building and what would be required as a major overhaul.
Keith?
If I can just comment on that, when we went to referendum, if you remember, we had basically a footprint, and I'm going back to the first referendum. We had a
2015.
footprint of the new building, and then some color-coded programming areas. There were no rooms drawn on that footprint, other than maybe the library and cafeteria. And that referendum number comes from comparable layout or footprints per square foot.
Right.
We already had the footprint of the MET building. They didn't have to create that, so they already had the footprint. So we use comparable square footage renovation numbers of buildings of that age for the required programming that they had done for the central office in Zenith. So that's how it is done before referendum. And then if it had passed, then they would have started drawing offices and classrooms into the footprint.
Right,
But
I
the footprint
understand. I
was
mean,
already there.
We're doing it with the wastewater treatment plant now too, and in some cases, there might be things that have gone out to the public already that are more of the summary, and then somebody can ask sometimes there are more detailed things out there for the extra curious. I'm just basically asking if there were those
I think
things here.
everything that exists is in that report, isn't it, Keith?
It is.
Which I think we've sent the link out numerous
Oh, yeah,
times.
yeah,
Yep.
I've definitely read
Yep.
it very carefully.
All right.
I might suggest that to best use Tyler and Oak Point's knowledge, that we don't have him here to ask questions and put him on the spot, but to
Yeah.
take these meetings with the opportunity to develop those questions, so when he comes back, he can give us the response then after research.
I think that's a reasonable request.
That makes sense, yeah.
All right. Anything else, any other questions specific to the district office? Seeing none, then I'd really kind of like to jump into the basement, figuratively, of course. You know, for this committee, you know, taking a look at how that space would be utilized, and establishing, you know, some type of criteria that we could provide as a recommendation to the board, with the understanding that there is a middle school, there's a neighborhood, it's, you know, it's not a grocery store kind of thing. So trying to, I just put down here 3 things of, you know, being able to establish what the basic criteria would be that we would want to recommend to the board. You know, we would say, is it purely educational? Is it just use it for storage? And I'm just giving examples. But is there criteria that folks on the committee feel strongly that, you know, these are things that we feel are comfortable, that we'd be comfortable with saying, here's how we could use that space. You know, could we, you know, do you want to use that space as a garage to work on cars? And I'm obviously being very wacky, but I'm trying to give examples of, you know, with the understanding that we're going to have a district office in Zenith above it, being able to establish here's what we would or would not want to see in the basement, I think is going to be important. So that as we then want to let the community know, we would be accepting proposals, and whether it's the YMCA that comes in and says, we'd like to use that space as kind of the new teen center as an example. Or if the town of Camden says, listen, we got gobs and gobs of stuff that we need to store, could we utilize that space for storage? And we could say, well, sorry, but you know, the committee has recommended that it not be used for storage, for whatever the reason would be. And again, just I'm giving an example. So, but then to be able to communicate that out to the community, we're accepting proposals, and we're accepting proposals up until this date, and after this date, we won't accept proposals anymore. And we will make a decision so that we can make a recommendation to the board as to what we think ought to go into that space. And whether it's something that would or would not require leasing that space, in which then the district would negotiate that lease. I think we discussed that briefly in the first meeting. So,
What process did the board, oh, sorry, Marcia, I didn't see how.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was curious what process the board used, because we've been through this once with the entire MET building. So aren't we kind of doing, I don't, and I could be wrong, but aren't we doing kind of a scaled back version of what the board's just done for the entire MET that led to the Mullins proposal in terms of developing what we're hoping for, what our needs are, and setting ways of advertising that, putting a cut-off date, and that was for the entirety. And we're now saying the only bit in this current artwork that's really up for debate is the basement. But isn't it kind of the same? Is it too simplistic to say it's basically the same thing, it's just the basement we're talking about?
That led into my question very well. I think with a heightened focus on safety, it's obvious to me that as is, whoever is the tenant in there is going to have access into one of our schools. Unless it's affordable to make the access to the basement totally separate. I don't know if that financially is significant, but I mean, we're talking about everybody wearing ID badges, and locking doors and bulletproof glass. I don't think we're going to develop a plan where there's a whole other user that just walks into your building where you have students. I don't think we were thinking that way before.
But I think, but just back to sort of that bigger question that you're asking, Matt, I see us as established, yes, in a sense, it's like that, but I feel like maybe we've learned something from that first round, and that we can do better the second time around. So in establishing that criteria and really qualifying what we're looking for and being very clear and concise, I think is where I see us.
Yeah, and I guess my main thing is let's not try and start from the ground up if we've kind of already done it once, learned from some mistakes, like like for you guys that were on the school board as part, I think both of you were on, 3 of you guys were on the board during that process?
I
or-
wasn't.
Okay, but 2 of you, well, you know, and obviously Carol, you're now more probably up to speed with things, but like
Yeah.
we've clearly learned something,
Right.
so can we just use what we've learned and have that be our driving force going
Mhm.
forward, 'cause
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, like, for example, we use the criteria of being school-friendly, education-friendly. For me, I would narrow that focus, because this focus has been narrowed for us in terms of space, that it would be compatible, if not focused, or given priority to programs that focus on K-8 education levels, or an 8-year-old to 15-year-old age span. But I would want to be more clear as to who the users might be.
So set up that type of criteria before we put it out
I would think
to the public
Of
or
course,
to
it-
whomever is going
priorities
to be
will
looking
given
at it.
to, you know, the
Yeah.
middle school age,
Yeah.
expanded to K-8 after that, and then K-12, and, you know, maybe then say that a minimum, and this is just off the top, the minimum use of the minimum use would have to be 3,000 square feet. For example, there might be a mixed-use space, I mean, maybe half of it's storage and half of it's the teen center. And again, so have a minimum use as opposed to requiring all of it.
But I guess my specific question is is what the board used before written down somewhere? And are those thoughts about how we can make it better captured somewhere as well? Just because it's kind of hard, I just want, like, is there something we could be looking at and then marking up and I'm not sure, because, like, in terms of what actually went out and was
Oh, the
publicized.
criteria, yeah. I
Right.
mean, be more than that?
Just,
No.
right, I'm hearing Pete say, well, it'd be good to do this and do this, and those are all like good things to think about, but if literally there was a criteria list, it'd be interesting to look at that and then work our way through it, and then as Carol says, we could say, well, this criteria wasn't specific enough, let's make that more concrete language and have something to work from, that's all.
I do think, though, it's fundamentally different to look at a compatible use on your campus rather than in one of your school buildings.
No, but he's just talking about the language of the proposal, so putting that out so that, you know, so what,
Yeah.
he's asking, was there something in place that we could use? I don't think there really was, that's just me.
It was
There's something
it was written by the attorney, so it was.
It was,
I mean, it's an
but,
incredibly frustrating
Yeah.
document that alienated
We can
quite
do-
a few. I mean, we don't need to rehash. I don't think it's a great model for, you know, and blame it on whoever you want.
We can do better.
But I think we could probably try to avoid getting to the point where we get proposals and then, I mean, we also probably have to remember that we're not some of you are the school board, but ultimately that kind of thing is a school board decision, what can be in there and what can't. So we shouldn't maybe give the community any illusions about, okay, we come up with this criteria and then the school board doesn't really think it's so good. I don't know.
could maybe we do some research and find that, since that's a really good question, and send it out to the committee? Like, I'm wondering if this section here on the basement is sort of our task for the next meeting, to be really thinking about that, you know, we're kind of brainstorming, but that doesn't feel like the best use of our time. That's just me
Yeah. No,
thinking.
I-
I'd really
perfectly
like to
fine.
really think about the
Okay.
basement, because I have some concerns about it.
I'm certainly fine with that.
That's, but
You
again,
know,
just me.
I guess, you know, I would, you know, really try to want to limit our time to be done at 6:30, but is there, I guess I would only ask one question, and I think Max raises a great point. Let's not reinvent the wheel if there's something already out there that we could build off of. The only question I would have is maybe even a result of that, of the Mullins proposal, was there anything that the board took away from that for sure we know we don't want to do this? And is there a this? And if that's an unfair question, I'm okay with that, but I just wondered, was there anything that was key as a takeaway from that that, and we can certainly end the meeting on that with the understanding that really the driver for the next meeting, it will be a focus on MET, because I think that could probably take up an entire meeting, or the basement, I'm sorry.
So
was
your question is, you wanna know what
Was
the
there
board?
anything that the board took away from the, the initial proposal from the Mullins piece, that we said, you know what, and coming back and kind of taking another look at this is, we definitely don't want this, if there was anything.
We didn't
So
talk about
we
it.
did, so I can speak personally, because as a board, we didn't really discuss, I mean, the reason why, it failed for a number of reasons. For me, it was transferring ownership. But my takeaway personally led to my idea, my thought that we narrow the focus of the ultimate users of the space. That, to me, the proposal in terms of the users of the building spanned, I mean, there was no defining that. It could have been anybody
Okay.
doing projecting.
Could you repeat that a little louder for me to get?
Sorry. I think my takeaway from the Mullins proposal process was that the intended group that would be the eventual users was too broad to fit next to an educational space. And so I would need to narrow that focus to be more educationally oriented.
I think we're talking about two different things.
Yeah.
The process the board used, and then we're alternating that with the proposal that the board received as a result of our process. I mean, the Mullins, he was responding to what the board did, and I think you're asking, what did the board do?
Well,
And can we learn from that?
Yeah, my question, like I said, might be a little bit unfair, but I'm just trying to get a sense of, was there anything that the board took away that said, we can't go down this path, so we know to
Yes.
go
Just
right?
giving the
Yes.
building away.
Yes, that what we said was we were not willing to sell that building.
Okay.
And that's
That-
what
that was-
should
that's
have
fine.
been in the proposal.
Okay.
Right.
From the
that I-
beginning,
that I agree with.
that we wanted to retain
Okay.
ownership of
That's
the
all the
property.
board discussed.
That's-
Right.
Yes,
that's
but
all
other
I
than
was-
that, the board, as you know,
Okay.
So I have a question. If we come up with criteria for what we want to propose for this, does it then go to the board to say, okay, we accept these steps that you've done? Or do we make the final decision? I mean, I don't know what our standing is on this,
It's my understanding we would be making a recommendation
to the board, okay,
Is that
and then we
accurate?
would vote
Alright.
on it.
okay.
Allison?
I personally like to be able to give maybe a few different options to the board, so I don't feel in a position to settle this school safety situation and that's a larger conversation, but I'd like to be able to explore sort of on the surface, okay, here's maybe an education-based use that expressed interest. Here's another thing that would maybe be more of a revenue-generating opportunity, but maybe not exactly what the school wants to have there. I think when I go back to the original resolution that the board passed that got us to this point, it was fairly broad in the sense of exploring a multi-use building and possibly pursuing a zoning change that would allow for commercial activity. So I'm not saying that means that's definitely what we want, but the board did say we're looking at, this full range of options for the building. And I heard from the board a lot of enthusiasm about the Mullins proposal, but just thinking we're not gonna give up the land and the building. We've thought about that more. We like a lot of these things. Maybe the basement might be available. So I think it would be better if we didn't limit it too much, but we also don't make promises to people that are submitting proposals. It's more we ask for expressions of interest, and then we're able to pass that along as, get direction from the school board then what is worth pursuing and what's not.
Keith, can I ask you a question? Does the basement also have 8,000 square feet?
Probably almost, the basement does come in a
Come in
little bit. And bear in mind that, typically, utilities are located in the basement.
Right.
So we're probably gonna suck some of that, some more space out of that.
Yeah, yeah, just trying to think how much usable space.
Meaning, Keith, for example, the fact that it would need a new heating system,
And
what makes that work is gonna probably be in the basement.
right, it needs new ventilation system.
Right.
That may very well be in the basement if we wanna get it off the roof where you should have put ventilators.
Well, it's interesting though, that, isn't it, cause it seems like, I have no knowledge of exactly what that might look like, but that could really change the amount of space that's available, just, so, which,
Right, that's
I just
what
guess the
I
only
was
piece to me is sometimes it seems hard if we're putting something out there that invites so many different things. You know, I don't know, that level of criteria just seems like,
And this is where Oak Point can help us.
right, exactly,
Because they're
right.
the
Yeah.
ones that will be able to say, look, you're gonna take that air handler unit and
Yeah.
we're gonna put it in the basement and,
Right.
you know, it's gonna be this big and so
Right,
it needs this much
exactly.
square footage.
In terms of, similar to before, where there'd be just sort of like generic boxes in the floor space saying like, this is basically how much space you'll need for those things, right?
Right.
Right,
It doesn't
and-
really matter where it is or whatever.
New
it's
electrical
just-
entrance is gonna take this much space and you need
The
this
elevator
much
machine
space
room
from
is
it.
gonna
You're
be-
gonna need a new sprinkler entrance. And with all modernized, which is gonna take probably 5 or 6 times the space that the existing sprinkler entrance is taking,
I
so.
think that's our first
Yeah,
question.
they can pull all that together, so.
I mean, I think to really identify what is our usable space in the basement, given the fact that
It's gonna be
the second and
important.
third floors will be used by people.
Mhm.
And
And
not
I-
even have, this may be a moot point.
I think looking at what goes in there is important, because like now, right now, where we are is right next to the bus barn. And when they start running some of that heavy equipment, okay, so I think
Trying to teach.
whatever we put in the basement has to be somewhat compatible with what's going on upstairs.
Well, I
Yeah.
think
That's a good point.
that was,
Not metalworking,
it
probably.
was, that was
Tools.
my sense of whichever one you like. Is to be thinking, at least in my eyes, a couple of things. One, you're gonna have a school that's gonna be within close proximity. Two, now we're talking about, if this were to go through, you'd have office space and again, some educational space above that. And third, and so I'll throw in my own personal piece here, is that you have a neighborhood here also. And, you know, understanding what the impact is to the neighborhood as well. So that would be the only thing I would leave everybody with. What I put down here is a deliverable. What I'll do is I'll reach out to Tyler and just say, hey, if everyone's in agreement, I would say the next meeting could be just completely focused on the basement. I think there's a lot there that could probably eat up most of the meeting. And to be able to, come up with a variety of ideas. That's why I was taking a look at the charter again, Allison, because you're right. It's, what are some of the things that, we could look at as a variety of things. I still think it would be important if we can kind of hone in. I think that would be helpful to the board. But clearly to explore all the different types of opportunities. But if the committee's okay, I don't mind reaching out to Tyler and saying, listen, we're gonna have a big discussion about the basement in the next meeting. In terms of what the building would need to function, how much of that space would get used up, whether it's for heating or HVAC and all of that good stuff. Could you give us a sense of that, so we can understand what the true usable space would be? And then I still think, then kind of dive in a little bit into some criteria, and then clearly talk about how do we want to get the word out to the community. This space is available if you have a proposal that fits within, some fairly loose parameters, but certainly some parameters. It's from this date to this date, and bring them on in. Does that sound reasonable, or is that
I would just
any other
add,
discussion?
I would add just, in addition to the size of the available useful space, the condition of it, the type of space, is it gonna be noisy? I mean,
What is its best use?
it may not be a best use other than storage.
Yeah.
So,
Could we get a copy of that, whatever was written for
Yeah,
from the board
that's
last
on
time?
my
it'd be great to ground us in something, I think.
Let's not forget, there are a lot of community buildings and spaces that we currently use that are actually in basements. So, you know, the Jeff Parker Room, basement, the library, Walsh History Center, basement. So, I know it looks a little bit grim in some of those places, but some of it's just the junk and the, you know, maybe be careful about how we talk about it.
Like what I
It's
said,
a community that
I think that's fair, and those are spaces that have been renovated and put to great use, so I don't think your comment is certainly lost, certainly not on me.
Certainly, also the rental income might make this more palatable to voters, because it reduces,
Right.
maybe that's what you were getting at.
And that's right, I'm trying to think of us maybe as like marketing just a little bit, just,
Sure.
you know, when we talk about, oh, the basement, it's, you know, I was almost thinking like the ground floor or the something.
Many of us had kids who use those as regular classrooms, so.
Right, there's a
I
lot of
taught
evidence of that.
Yeah.
I taught in the basement. My classrooms,
Right, the south side of
Well,
the
we
south
had
side of the
basement
basement's great.
bay.
we were the basement.
That was just- We might have you
And
introduce
Charlie's
outside
the one.
windows.
I'm sure he was glad to be
Oh, yeah.
included in that.
Sorry.
All right, any other comments before we break away? All right,
I think we've
we're
made
all
some
in agreement,
progress
I
there.
think probably the discussion about use of the basement will probably be the key agenda item for the next meeting. There's the April break, so that's why we've got a little bit longer break before our next meeting. So that's that, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm sure, yeah, it's a great case.
Okay, we'll hit stop on both of these.
Are you?
I see all those roofs on Facebook, it's like.
Thank you, Allison, for giving the street.
Well, it worked out great, actually,
I
there's
know, but
somebody,
it was-
when I got here, Colin was like, he had tracked down, like, talk of there being a need to live stream, and so he was ready too, so.
Oh,
We both decided we would both do it, and between the two of us, we should come up with a,
Just wait one day.
Thank you, Keith.
but we're still running at
Thank
this.
you, Emily.
That one, some kind of coordinator that made them feel that way.
Yeah.
Yep, parents and their parents.